Class, MASH. By Anutty. Chapter 321, Climbing Mountains. MASH had left after painting his weapon. He wasn't sure if he should name the weapon yet. The durability and value of the metal were unknown. Giving it a name would make it too special, and that would make it worse if the thing just broke. He would wait. If it withstood a few fights, then it would earn a name. His enemies might give it one before he could. After examining the weapon, he dashed up the mountain. He wasn't slow and the mountain wasn't that big. Within an hour or so, he had already climbed most of it. Although, he hadn't seen anything that might indicate a lord of any kind. No castles or buildings at all. He was able to see what looked like a cave entrance near the top though. The Lord better is there. He really didn't want to have to search other places. The world was large, and he couldn't waste time searching it. Halt! The shout echoed from the cave long before MASH approached. The voice rolled down the side of the mountain. It was so loud that MASH was a little concerned about an avalanche. The snow didn't seem bothered by the voice though. MASH slowed but didn't stop. He continued marching through the snow. Now that he wasn't moving, the chill was beginning to affect him. It wouldn't be dangerous with how resistant his body was, but it didn't feel good. The usual warmth of his mana wasn't there. I need to speak to the Lord. MASH shouted as loud as he could. He didn't know if the speaker could hear him. He continued to stomp through the snow, and the voice shouted again. It was a deep voice that echoed from the cave. The Lord will not speak with one such as you. Begone. Again, the voice seemed to threaten an avalanche. However, the settled snow firmly didn't do as commanded. MASH took its example and continued to tread up the slope. Even if the speaker wasn't the Lord, it sounded like the Lord was in there. The voice didn't respond to his progress, so MASH tried another angle. I just want to go home. I don't want any trouble. MASH's wishes were not met. A figure passed into his domain. It was barely a shadow to his eyes, and it leaped at him from the direction of the cave. MASH took a second to just examine the bizarre creature. It was an enormous cat. A weirdly muscular cat, that had an impossibly white coat. It was so pure that the figure perfectly blended with the snow. His domain revealed more than his eyes though, and he managed to lift his new staff against the creature. MASH held his weapon between both hands, and the beast crashed into it head first. He deflected it, batting the creature into the snow. The impact was enough to send him into the snow too. MASH sprung to his feet, his domain let him see as the creature attempted to get at him again. This time, he was more prepared, and he swung the staff like a club. The creature attempted to flex its body around the staff, but MASH just changed the direction of his swing to match the movement. The staff connected, and one of the sharper teeth spikes even punctured the cat's hide. It rolled across the snow like a log, before managing to get back to its feet. It stared at MASH, and he met its gaze confidently. You may have strength, but I have a family. The talking cat stunned MASH, especially since the voice matched the one from the cave. That delay cost him as another creature leaped out of the snow. It had been skulking through it, but just beyond the limits of his domain. The monster's claws were out, and they tore into his forearm as he raised it in defense. His moment of confusion made him forget about the weapon, and he faced the consequences of that. The claws dug gouges into his flesh, and blood spilled from the wound. The creature's other claw glanced off his shirt as if it were a set of armor. The force still sent him tumbling through the snow though. MASH didn't stay down for long. He used the staff to push himself forward. The sudden leap let him dodge the cat's follow-up strike. He rolled over his head using the staff and his hand to rise to the feet. His head swiveled all the way around this time, and he noticed another cat this time. He saw 3 in total but knew that there might be more beneath the snow. The 3 cats were almost identical. However, the one that had come from beneath the snow had thin black stripes running across its legs. Finally, the last one had black fur around their feet. The first, the pure white one, spoke again. You are dangerous but alone. Begone. Never return here. MASH's arm spilled blood onto the snow for only a moment longer. The wound had almost completely healed, and he waved the hand in a placating gesture. When he saw the creature pause, he began to explain his intentions. I don't want to fight. Just let me speak to the Lord. I just need some mana. Liar. You had come into this world unprompted. One of those that seek our father's death. His authority. This came from the second beast. Its voice was considerably higher than he expected, and Mash realized that the creature might be female. It was hard to tell with the snow and their fur. He shook his head quickly. No, why would I even do that? It's not like I'll get anything without mana. The first creature drew his attention back to it with a small growl. All those that come to seek the same thing speak the same lies. We will not forget. Mash raised both hands, holding their palm out toward the two closest creatures. His weapon fell and dug into the snow. It stuck out like a weird tree. Mash ignored it and tried to placate the monsters. I really don't want to harm your father. Just. His voice lagged as Priscilla sent a message. I would assume the Lord is the one preventing magic. The others, that these creatures mentioned, likely desired the same thing as you. I expect the only way to accomplish this is to kill the Lord and take his place. You must own the world to change how it works. She had stated what his mind had been trying to reject. The Lord was probably the world's owner, and his coming here was because of that. The trial was to kill the Lord and make a way home for himself. The realization didn't shake him. When had he come to normalize killing and death? What had changed? You killed someone who you thought deserved it. The slaver's death showed you that death isn't the worst thing people have done. The fact that Priscilla was able to explain his thoughts better than he could, didn't escape him. She was right. He didn't know when exactly the change had happened, but death didn't seem as horrible as it had been before. It wasn't his class that had changed him either. This was just him, and he accepted it. He could kill people now. It would affect him, he had no doubt of that. The difference was that he could live with it now. You know what? Let's just fight. I will go see the Lord after. Mash kicked the staff and spun it into his hands before settling into a combat stance. One that he hadn't used in a long time. It felt familiar, and he smiled at the cats he had just provoked. They snarled and the pure white one leaped at him. This time he was prepared. More than that, he wasn't trying to talk to them anymore. His staff spun around him as he twisted his body. The cat brought down its claws to push him into the dirt. He let them dig into his shoulders. The damage would heal, and they couldn't cut that deep through his clothes. He took the hit to bring his staff up and strike the creature on the underside of its skull. There was a breaking sound, and Mash checked his staff as the cat was sent tumbling. The weapon was fine, which meant that the beast was probably not getting up soon. Another creature jumped him. Mash's wounds were still healing, so it hurt when he twisted to smack the strike aside. The beast's claws met the metal staff and were swatted away. The momentum of the impact wasn't wasted. He spun on the snow, turning his body nearly the whole way around. The cat reacted, jumping back to dodge him. It was not prepared for Mash to release his weapon and hurl it like a javelin. The staff wasn't sharp, but it still managed to punch through the creature's skin. The sheer amount of force sent it into the snow like a comet. It left a long trail. The final cat leaped at him in a wild rage. It actually screamed, in words that he could understand. How dare you? The tone was definitely that of a younger creature. And he got the feeling that he had just half killed their parents. He let that thought linger, as he caught their claws with his own hands. Its claws dug through his flesh, but they couldn't get through his bones either. He awkwardly clasped hands with the beast that was almost twice his size. Mash looked into its eyes and saw the blind fury. The anger behind those eyes told Mash to just end the fight. He lifted his arms up in a sudden motion. The beast was physically weaker than him, and its whole body was lifted into the air. Then he swung his hands down, slamming them into the snow with enough force to send a ripple across the surface. He stepped back and stared down at the cat. The cat rose on shaky feet, but Mash didn't finish it off. Killing it would be easy, but pointless. It wouldn't give him levels or a way out. And these beings didn't seem particularly evil either. He strolled over to the other cat, the one that had been partially impaled by his staff. It was struggling to remove it, and he winced at the sight. The staff had pierced the creature just beside its front leg. A few more inches to the right, and it would probably be dead. Instead, it just looked to be in a lot of pain. Blood had streaked through its fur and the surrounding snow. It was whimpering as the odd shape of the staff poked it in places it shouldn't be poked. Both to get his weapon back, and to let it start healing properly, he took the weapon back. He grabbed the staff and yanked it out in one quick motion. The cat yelped in pain. He awkwardly apologized as he started to climb the mountain again. Sorry, about that one. His domain told him that the first cat was shifting, and he turned to check their condition. The blood that was pouring from its mouth was bad. It was definitely a broken jaw. Seeing the blood staining its face, he thought that crushed was a more accurate description. He left the creatures to lick their wounds and ran up the mountain. Chapter 322, The Lord. Mash walked into the cave. The snow didn't follow him. In fact, the dry state of the cave floor made him wonder if the snow ever fell inside. There wasn't a magical barrier of any kind, and he wondered what kept the snow out. He didn't give it much thought as he strolled deeper into the cave. The gradual rise in temperature felt odd too, but he guessed it made sense if someone was living here. It was disappointing though. The world owner here wouldn't be that impressive if those cats were his guard. The cave was dark, but his domain let him see the shape of the cave easily. Although, the path was proving longer than he had expected. The temperature kept rising almost to the point of being uncomfortable. The cave twisted and turned. It descended into the larger paths that felt too large. He switched from his cautious walk to a more daring run when he realized the end was nowhere to be seen. The final turn leads him into a wide open room, and Mash realized why the temperature had been rising so consistently. Sitting on what could only be described as a throne, was a man covered in flames. They wrapped around his body like a cloak. His eyes were like small furnaces of orange light, and his hair flickered. Other than man's skin, everything else was aflame. Honestly, skills like that didn't mean much. He had seen and heard tales of worse. Luke's own soul body skill kind of did the same, but it had even more coverage. Red's blood body was definitely an even more advanced variant. Mash let his gaze wander the room itself. 6 tall pillars of black stone climbed dozens of meters and pierced the stone of the ceiling. The floor was tiled with the same stone as the pillars. There were no torches in the room. He could see 2 more entrances into the room beside the throne. In a voice that caused the room to heat up further, the Lord spoke. "You dare to trespass in my domain." The man's words were accompanied by a show of force. Mash felt something immaterial press down on his domain. It was an odd sensation, but not a new one. It wasn't too long ago when his domain clashed with another. And this would turn out no different. Mash remembered what he had done before. He imagined his own domain pushing back and then doing more. He imagined it consuming the other domain. His eyes widened slightly when it failed. While the Lord's domain couldn't push further, Mash realized that he had similarly been stopped. Their domains at least seemed even. The tug of war continued, as Mash formulated his own response. "Is there any way for me to convince you to let me use mana to open a portal and leave?" Mash gave the Lord a fake smile, expecting that it would fail. He didn't hold many hopes for a Lord that had refused to see him outright. Nor with a man would refer to himself as the Lord. Both things led Mash to think that he would not get along with this man. The Lord's face twisted in rage. The flames in his eyes turned into a raging fire as he shouted. "You dare request something of me, after attacking my pets, and invading my castle?" The Lord rose from his seat. His hands left scorch marks on the throne as he pushed himself up. Mash could tell that the Lord was bigger than him and was ridiculously muscled. His body was wrapped in flames, but they did little to hide the thick arms that even blacksmiths couldn't match. Despite the angry expression on the man, Mash just asked another question, noticing an incongruency with what the previous creatures had said. "Weren't they your children?" Mash was pretty sure that was what the beast earlier had said. Maybe it was just a complex? The Lord's face went blank for a moment. Then he laughed a malicious laugh. "They were just beasts. Descending from my blood doesn't make them my children. Those are but pets. Worthless creatures that failed to achieve a better form." The Lord's mirth was at the expense of his own children. Mash firmly decided that he didn't like the man. That statement did bring up some other questions though. "Wait, so you are like some kind of evolved cat? Then where did you pick up this language? Are you even from my world?" Mash spit out his words in a rush. Apparently, the truth he had grabbed had been the wrong one. His mind raced with the possibilities, but he had no explanation for the language. How did a cat pick up his language? "You understand nothing of your world. And I was a tiger." The way the Lord replied made him sound petty. His voice still echoed with the rumbles of a volcano, but the words just made him seem so small. Mash must have revealed that on his face because the Lord's expression returned to one of anger. Despite the smallness of the Lord, the words he said prompted a very new question in Mash's mind. Did normal creatures have classes? He and everyone else assumed that wasn't the case. That the only beasts with power were monsters. What if the native monsters of his world were just animals with advanced classes? Those were questions for another person and another time. Mash's grip on his staff tightened, and his voice turned hard. He focused on the fight, knowing that this was nothing more than a prelude. Let's just get this over with. I need to get home, and you're in my way. The tiger man growled, revealing his animal side. His teeth were a little sharp, but they didn't match his own teeth. You will die like all the others before you. The man held his hand toward him, and flames rushed out in a wave of chaotic heat. They didn't come from his hands but seemed to spray out from his clothes. Mash rolled to the side and stopped just behind one of the pillars. Flames poured out around the pillar, surrounding him with a swath of heat. Even with his resistant body, sweat built across his face. Although it didn't last long as his skin dried and his lips cracked. The orange fires felt endless, but they weren't tall. They covered the stone floor like a carpet. The stone was heating quickly, but Mash jumped high and toward the wall on his right. He twisted his body so that the flat of his feet struck the wall. Mash glanced toward the Lord, to see the man jumping toward him in turn. Mash swung his staff down while pushing off the wall himself. The jerky motion was a little awkward, but he managed the strike all the same. The Lord met it was a sword of pure flame, which did absolutely nothing to stop the staff. At first, Mash didn't understand what was happening, but his domain and Priscilla caught on before he did. His body moved as Priscilla's message came. Dodge. Mash didn't have many options midair, but he had some. He threw his staff as hard as he could, directly toward the ceiling. The force of the throw sent him down and let him just barely avoid the explosion that erupted from the fire sword's blade. The force behind it sent him into the ground that much faster. He rolled, but still felt the impact in his bones. The hot stone felt warm to his feet as he stood. His staff crashed into the ground, having left a series of cracks on the ceiling above. One of Mash's arms was burned and began healing immediately. How is he using magic, and why doesn't the domain pick it up? Mash sent the message while dodging behind another of the pillars. No magic. I believe he has a finite amount of flames. It is a part of his body like red, but not as intermixed. Flames pushed into the pillar, and Mash wondered why they were even there. The pillars did nothing to help the Lord but did a lot for him. It was just a hunch, but Mash turned to place the pillar just before his fist. He clenched his hand tightly. The pillar was large enough to hide behind and thicker than most trees. With that being said, Mash struck it like a rolling boulder. His hand was clenched into a fist, and it plunged into the pillar. The black stone broke like glass. He punched into it, leaving him a nice hole to peek inside what was now an obviously hollow pillar. Mash screamed in pain as he yanked his hand out. His hand was charred, the skin turned black by the fire that he could now see running through the pillar. It roared like a river and Mash understood. This room was the source of his flames. Fighting in here was a bad idea. Mash still hadn't the opportunity to truly test his strength against the Lord, but he felt like he would be more than a match for the man. Mash jumped this time, going directly for the Lord. The Lord struck out with another sword of flame. Mash punched through the sword with an already burned hand. No reason to damage his good hand when his left fist was already burned. The pain spiked as his fist met the flames, but he pushed through it. The sword exploded, sending a series of burns down his arm and slowing his strike considerably. Even still, his fist shot the Lord like a slingshot. The man flew toward the entrance, crashing into the stone wall beside the exit. Mash's hand was a mess. The skin around his hand and arm was scorched badly. His hand was especially bad, and he could even make out the white of his bone there. He couldn't feel it anymore and didn't know if his healing would extend that far. The burns themselves were healing, but that was more like regrowing a limb. Pain and adrenaline heightened his focus, and Mash felt that his attributes were improving. His hunger skill was still functioning despite the lack of mana. Mash didn't linger on the pain, and he rushed toward the Lord. He scooped up the staff in his good hand and sprinted toward the recovering man. The wall he had crashed into was riddled with cracks, but the man himself seemed undamaged. The Lord swayed on his feet a little. Mash's luck was good, the Lord must have struck his head. Fights at this level came down to moments, and this was one that he wouldn't miss. It gave him the time needed to catch the Lord. Mash arrived with his staff held out like a spear. He would impale the man if he could. Even dazed, the Lord had the attributes to react. Mash was almost certain that the Lord's strength was near his own. That was at the start of the fight though. Now Mash was stronger, and faster. Chapter 323, Tiger of Fire. Mash pushed the staff toward the Lord, who raised 2 hands to block the blow. The impact shook the whole cave, but the Lord stopped him. Small rocks fell from the ceiling, and the Lord caught the staff in his hands. The man grinned, his eyes filled with an arrogant glee. Mash ground his teeth. His left hand screamed in pain, but he ignored it. He tightened his hand on the staff and pushed. 1 step forward caused the Lord to stumble back. His arrogance from a moment ago vanished. The difference in strength was noticeable now, and Mash pushed again. His slow steps turned into a run. Each step struck the ground harder than the last, and he left a trail of cracks as he forced the Lord out of the room. Mash ran, pushing the Lord further and further from his throne. From the flame that he used as the basis of his power. The man responded, his own clothes of flame expanding into a raging inferno of fire. It scalded Mash's skin. If not for the pain tolerance built into his body, he was sure that his body would cease from the burns. Stop. You need time to recover. You can heal, but you need to heal. Priscilla's advice barely registered, and Mash continued to run. The Lord is trapped by Mash's raw strength. The Lord couldn't dodge any more. If he tried to move, then he would just get impaled. In the same way, Mash felt like he couldn't stop. Priscilla was right, he needed to heal. At the same time, he was just as certain that the Lord would kill him if given the chance. If he stopped this fight, additional stats would bleed out of him, and he wasn't sure if he would survive that. Priscilla was probably right about his healing, but Mash couldn't be certain. That left him to continue the charge. Flames grew around the Lord, expanding into a miniature sun. Mash's clothes ironically fared the best. When was the last time he checked the path? He would need to see what changed later. Mash pushed and ran, his speed grew as each second passed. Mash charged through the cave entrance, exploding out of the cave. A snowstorm had started at some point, but it turned to rain around the Lord. There was a slight cliff just past the cave entrance, and he tumbled over it. They both went spiraling through the air, Mash relishing in the snow as it cooled his burned body. Even through his clothes, Mash could tell that his skin was singed. The snow helped, and he quickly pushed himself to his feet. He leaned on the staff a little. Mash saw that his left hand wasn't healing properly. Most of the arm had healed, but the hand was still numb and charred. Priscilla's next message urged him to move. That was foolish. End the fight. Mash didn't need to be told twice. It wasn't hard to spot the Lord as most of the snow was burned around him. The thick snow partially blocked his vision, and it strangely bothered his domain too. The thickness of the snow actually made it harder to use his domain. Not so much that he couldn't see the Lord though. The Lord snarled, his voice now matched that of a bestial roar. You dare push me from? Mash didn't let him finish. He jumped at the Lord, swinging his staff around to strike the man's head. The Lord raised a hand to block in surprise, but Mash just pushed through it. This time he definitely heard a breaking noise, and the Lord toppled. He practically spun, his head struck the dirt roughly. Mash followed up. He brought the staff down where the Lord's head was when the man's body expanded. The flames that had been his clothes blended with his flesh and he grew. His body warped, and Mash downward strike the shoulder blade of a much different creature. The man had transformed into what he had claimed to be. Now an orange tiger with orange marks, that made its coat resemble fire, lay on the ground. It was also considerably larger than Mash, and it rose in a sudden shoulder tackle. The tiger form was a lot stronger, and Mash was sent crashing through a nearby pile of snow. It erupted into a shower of snow that quickly got mixed with the storm. Mash's bones didn't break, but he was in pain nonetheless. The tiger managed to stand, but one of its front legs was broken, and its shoulder was bleeding a little. The damage didn't heal, and a broken leg was far worse than a missing hand. Mash grinned despite his own injuries and was surprised to taste blood. That hit had done more than he thought. If the class system was working, he could see how much damage he had actually taken. Fighting without it was odd and risky. You are not doing well. The last strike shook some of your organs. Once you regain mana, I will work on making your organs more resistant to force. Priscilla's message was a small relief. If it was really bad, he was certain she wouldn't be talking about the future. That means it felt worse than it was, and he really considered what that meant. A numb, almost completely charred hand and organ damage no longer constituted as life-threatening. Hey? Yet, he was definitely a monster. Even more than this cat man was. The tiger leaped at Mash, its fur danced in the storm, seeming to turn into a living flame. It was certainly hot enough to be one. His staff met the creature's body. Not in a strike but, he used it to deflect the creature and spun the weapon with the momentum of the impact. The staff struck the tiger as it landed in the snow beside him. The teeth on the weapon ground into the creature's ribs and it growled as Mash sent it tumbling through the snow. He didn't let up rushing at the tiger. His domain let him notice the sudden change in temperature before his eyes, and he instinctively jumped away. He narrowly managed to dodge it as fire erupted from the creature's fur. The heat melted the snow far beyond the flame's reach. Mash felt the water on his skin dry up for a moment. The snowstorm never let him remain dry, and it quickly chilled his body. He was really lucky for the storm. It was helping him resist the flames considerably. He let the cool wash over him for a moment as it eased his pain. The tiger jumped on him, this time going for a savage bite. Mash turned, thrusting the staff against its side. This time it pierced through the tiger's flesh, but it bit into him. It did manage to tear through his shirt, and its teeth sunk into him, piercing his shoulder blade and chest, but not deeply enough to kill him. Nor was it able to get through his bones. What had Priscilla done to his bones? He pushed through the pain, pushing the staff deeper as the tiger's body rapidly heated. Another burst of flame would not be good, and Mash had few options to stop it. He did something cheap and disgusting. He bit the creature back. Mash knew his teeth were strong, but he didn't take any risks. The tiger's head was just beside his own, and he aimed his bite. His bottom teeth dug into the beast's eye. The monster's skull broke under his teeth too and it leaped away in genuine terror. Mash had taken its piece of flesh though. He swallowed and smiled at the monster, his teeth made red with its blood. Or maybe that was his own blood. It didn't really matter. He felt a rush of power that could only be from his skill. He had known that one would work already, but he still hesitated when it came to taking a bite out of a person. A tiger wasn't a person though. Mash's shirt was stained red with blood, and his left arm was basically useless at this point. The burns had been one thing, but the bite had gone through the arm as well. Blood ran down his arm and stained the snow beneath him like syrup. The thickness of his blood was unnatural. The tiger stared at him with one eye. Human or not, Mash could read the expression of fear, and intended to capitalize on it. He ran at the tiger, his speed and strength were even greater now. The tiger might be stronger than his human counterpart, but not by enough. With the bonus from the eye he had just swallowed, he was more than the tiger's equal in strength and far superior in speed. Mash closed the distance in an instant. He swung the staff around, bringing it through the unbroken front leg of the tiger. It tried to dodge, but fear had delayed its reaction. The staff broke the creator's leg and it fell forward, its head bowed as it couldn't stand. Mash didn't have the luxury of hesitation in this instant. He plunged his staff down through the monster's skull. With its head in the dirt, it felt like an execution. The staff punched through the creature and stuck the ground beneath. It didn't move. Mash slumped forward onto the creature. Its body was still hot, but not to the point of scalding him. He rested against the creature. The fight was over. Eat. Mash, you need to eat it. You are too low on energy to heal without doing it. He groaned at the idea of eating the creature but did as he was told. His mind felt like it was barely working, and he wondered how much he had been relying on the adrenaline and his skill. Not that the attributes were decreasing, and the fight was over. His mind lost the heightened sense of focus. He tore into the creature's hide like an animal himself. One-armed, he couldn't really tear pieces of the creature out easily. His teeth were strong enough though, so he ate it like a monster would. He took one bite. It empowered him, and he realized idly what was happening. It was a familiar feeling, and he took the next more eagerly. Blood, meat and fur filled his mouth. The meat was tough, the fur was hot, and the blood was like iron. He ate it ferociously. It fueled him and gave him the power to keep eating. At some point, his arm healed. He didn't know how or when. His body was filling with more power than ever before. More than a creature like this should give. And he felt it a connection to the forces within himself. He knew it was time. His focus drifted from the monster, from the snowstorm, from the very world itself, and it drifted inward. He felt the power of leveling and advancing. Chapter 324, System Change. His consciousness drifted away toward a place he remembered all too well. Pillars of light rose up to illuminate the darkness. This time he had 3. Less than he had expected, but each one felt completely different. He couldn't feel his aches and pains anymore. Priscilla's comforting connection was absent this time too. Within his soul, he floated in a space that was impossibly empty. The 3 pillars were the only true existence within it now. The sense of glee that filled him was euphoric. He basked in the power radiating from the pillars. He had succeeded without mana or magic. This felt far more earned than his other advancements. And he just sat there, enjoying the moment of accomplishment. He managed to do it for all of 10 seconds before he turned to the pillars. As much as his glory felt good, there was something far more exciting for him to check. One pillar was a deep purple that seemed to take in more light than it gave off. He didn't quite understand how it was glowing. It seemed to function by swallowing the darkness around it rather than shining on its own. He just stared at it for a moment. Then he slowly extended a gentle hand toward it. Or what approximated to his hand in this place. The information flooded his mind. God of hunger and growth, having created your own mark, you have touched upon the power of divinity. The mark of the devourer is the power to eat. Bestow the mark to followers, to let them share in your growth. As the God of hunger, all is for you to consume. As the God of growth, there is never a limit to your powers. Your appetite is more endless than the cosmos. Your potential is vaster than the reach of the stars. As a god, you inherit a part of divinity. Your world will change to accommodate the presence of your mark. Your power is fundamental to the structure of your world, as such you will be bound to that world and those it has suborned. This choice will change the class system to the god system. Mash was officially out of his depths. It was one thing to meet a god and another to become one. Was he just skipping over the whole demigod phase that Luke was in? He also didn't like the idea of having followers. He had seen religions, and they were not the things he wanted. Already the idea of worship bothered him. He did like the things about his power though. Those sounded like the things that would let him fight dragons or the other world owners. He didn't even want to consider the implication of owning a piece of divinity, although it was admittingly persuasive. More importantly than all of that was a question. What in the world was the god system? He hesitantly left the pillar alone and drifted toward the next one. This was a black deeper than the darkest night. As he reached for it, it opened and revealed a swirl of colors. A multicolored rainbow that seemed to shine within that somehow defined everything. More than a little fascination caused him to just stop and stare at the far too beautiful light. The information that trickled into his head was as enticing as the light. Chimeric king of magical monsters, a king among creatures whose domain is as vast as your power. Magic is your essence, and it can never be taken from you. Conquer that which you know. Both magic and monsters define your being, and you rule over them. Monsters grow through consumption. A king of them consumes more than every other, for the king of monsters is the greediest among them. As an owner of a world, your kingdom is for you to control. Your power is strongest within your kingdom. As a king, your land and its people are a part of your essence. A true king inherits a throne of power. Your world will adjust to accommodate the throne of magical monsters. Your bloodline will change to pass down your power more easily to your descendants. This choice will change the class system to the king system. Mash again was at a loss for words. What in the world was happening? Was he just done with the class system? He knew that had been what he wanted, but trading it in for something new wasn't the plan. Also, he didn't want to be a ruler. Rather than a king or god, he would prefer a boss. That way at least he could leave all the work to some underling and be done with it. God and the king were in positions of rule. Neither of which was for him. Even with those tendencies, he was still tempted. While the god class was probably more powerful, this seemed more versatile. It seemed to grant him some power over magic and his transformation. Developing those rather than focusing on his mark would be easier to adjust to. It would likely be simpler to use as well. Finally, the class directly mentioned his domain. Anything that improved it would be ridiculous. He didn't actually know how much better it could get, so that alone was enticing. The part about his bloodline was bothersome though. It felt a little too much like the lord he had just killed. Also, what were these secondary pieces about? The first had been a piece of divinity, which he was fairly certain shouldn't belong in the hands of someone his age. This throne gave him a bit of a picture in regard to the current king's power though. If the king had something like this, then he would certainly be strong. Did the slave king have a throne? He was probably just pathetic despite it. A small like him probably had an equally small throne. That was a man he didn't want to emulate. There was one more option, and his hand reached for it. This pillar released light but also failed to do so. His mind couldn't understand what was happening around it. Unlike the other pillars, it was clear, yet it still gave off light. The light was without color or substance, but he could feel it. The warmth that radiated the light was different from the other two. Its power was something unknown but familiar at the same time. The information that flooded his mind came smoothly. Chimera of the end and beginning, your power is that of change. All that comes before is to be consumed, leaving behind an empty space for new beginnings. A force of nature, your power is ravenous, unyielding as the changing nature of time. Upend the structure that lesser beings conform to. Incite within them the freedom to escape the invisible bounds that constrict all things. The power of the end is oppressive, and its reach is endless. The power of beginnings is open and unknown. Your domain is limited only by your presence. Both are methods of change. The chimera of the end and beginning is an aspect of a fundamental force. You inherit that aspect and imprint it upon the reality in which you exist. An aspect contains a power that cannot be limited by a single body. It leaks through you into the world you inhabit. Your power is one of change and the world cannot resist its influence. This choice will change the class system to aspect lord of change system. Well, he only be at a loss for words so many times in quick succession. Now he had too many things to say. Not just about this option but all of them. Every class, if he could even call it that, was ridiculous. Not just in the power they promised but in the responsibility that came with them. The first would turn him into a god. He could think of no one who had more responsibility than them. The next was a king, a ruler of men and, in his case, monsters. Finally, this class seemed to be responsible for the end and beginning of things. How did someone even do such a thing? Beyond that responsibility, the class itself was ridiculous in what it promised. It sounded like it would make him as immutable as life and death. Even if the wording wasn't the same, it was definitely close enough. Not to mention the whole thing about becoming an aspect. It was probably similar to the throne yet more generalized. It was a frightening thing to think about. To be an aspect of change sounded more than a little foreboding. This one also felt the most personalized, in that the system it created was singular. The other classes sounded more directly powerful in some ways, but it was their systems that bothered him. All of them bothered him a bit. Now, that he had seen all the options, there was really only one task left. Which option was he going to pick? Oddly, he found that he knew the answer as soon as he said it. His went out, and he felt the power suffuse him. Chapter 325, New Paths Have Been Opened. Mash returned to the world to feel incredibly trapped. His arms, legs, neck, and even his ears felt locked in place. As soon as his consciousness returned, he could feel Priscilla delving into his thoughts. He let her but found it strange that he could feel it now. Normally, she could operate mostly without notice, but now he could feel her presence clearly. With the feeling, came knowledge. His power over her had grown more complete, and he was fairly certain he could remove or absorb her if he wanted to. It was a risk I accepted in binding myself to you. You have always had this power, whether you knew the method or not. Her message was unneeded. Both of them were fully aware that he wouldn't harm her for any reason. Even if she acted with more freedom, he still wouldn't act against her. He owed her more than a little trust. You know I wouldn't, but what changed? I assume it is your domain. It is considerably larger now. Mash wasn't sure how she knew that. All he could sense was wood. Now it was more than that. Stone, ice, lava, and even flesh in some places. It had formed around him in a shell. An egg that would send shivers down the bravest hero's spine. When he tried to move, the whole thing shuddered. Cracks spread from his slightest movements. He could break out. Priscilla said his domain was bigger. How much though? And how big was this cocoon? Check your abilities. Delay and I will do my best to attack you. Mash felt the message and chuckled. Rarely had Priscilla been the one to lose patience. Actually, he didn't think it had ever happened before. He sent her a mental shrug and felt her spike of annoyance. Then he couldn't hold back anymore and shifted his focus away from the shell encasing him. It was time to see what had changed. Name, the Chimera of the End and the Beginning. Stage, Hatchling. Level, 151. Health, 10,010/10,010. Energy, 8,290/8,290. Fortitude, 501/1001. Endurance, 329/529. Strength, 393/693. Agility, 429 729. Intelligence, 250 300. Wisdom, 150 200. Charisma, 150 200. Free stats, 0. Skills, hunger, magical layered wood, inhuman hibernation, chimeric transformation, wooden birth, chimeric reconstruction, vagabond's path, chimeric domain, reconstructed adaptable monster core, chimera's constitution, wooden body, mimic's avarice, harbinger of nothing, devoured soul body, mark of the devourer. Hunger, passive. You have gone beyond your limits when fighting enemies and devouring their power. Your limits know no bounds. Gain stats continuously when hunting. Rate increases with hunger. Stats decrease rapidly when out of combat. Current rate, +1 to 100 all attributes per minute. Magical layered wood. Magic layering, you started with sticks and grew them into something that could not exist naturally. But what does the chimera of ends and beginnings care for the natural order? All magic you steal can be combined to create impossible and unnatural magics. The more magic you use at once, the more energy you consume. In human hibernation begin anew, you have stolen the techniques of mages and monks to form an artificial technique. You molded those techniques into your unnatural existence. Recover from nearly any wound. As a fundamental aspect, your life is tied to it. The greater your end, the longer you need to begin. Chimeric transformation. Chimera, a chimera. In truth, you change your body changes through your species. Transform your body by taking on aspects of those which you have consumed. Control which aspects to take and combine them to create the perfect form. Wooden birth. Magical beginning, form imitations of creatures you have consumed, imitating life through your magic. Impart your own life into the creatures to grant them true vestiges of life. As the chimera of the beginning, you can create true life. You cannot gain experience by killing the life you create. A portion of what monsters earn gain will be returned to you. Chimeric reconstruction, consume what you kill for more than just stats. Steal their flesh to repair your own. Their blood becomes yours. Your enemies are nothing more than your medicine. Vagabond's path. Path of change, unique. Having chosen the path of change, you have freed yourself from your own world. An ender of eras, your journey is one filled with hope and devastation. Open portals to worlds you have already been to. Once per year, travel to a world in need of change. Your world is one of endless change, of boundless freedom. Chimeric domain. Domain of the end, passive. Your eyes just weren't enough. Sense the changes in the reality around you. Connect to the mana and life in your space and inherently understand the nature of the mana and life. Your presence permeates the space around you, bringing an end to the magic and strength of enemies beneath you. The end touches all. Current range, 75 18,300 feet. Reconstructed adaptable monster core, passive and unnatural mana core has fundamentally altered your body. Fusion with a monster has given you access to its potential. Stamina and mana combine to become energy. Your monstrous body is better able to handle the changes to your core. You have progressed your core further, by forcing it to adapt. Now, you may only further your core by repeating the process. Current bonus, 100% efficiency. Wooden body. Body of the beginning, passive. You can connect with the world around you. By expanding your energy, you bring your magic to life as another one of your limbs. All of your magic within your domain is bound to your will. Chimera's constitution, passive. Giving up your humanity has improved your body, improving your physical control, natural defenses, animalistic intuition, and mana control. No longer a human in any sense, you are no longer bound by that which limits them. You have created your own race, improving your rate of growth. Mimic's avarice, passive. Devour your enemy in battle to temporarily raise your stats. The fresher the victim, the stronger the bonus. Gain full benefits even when consuming through your magic. Absorbs some properties of those you devour alive. Removes the negative effects of things you consume. Harbinger of nothing, passive. Belonging to no race or group, you have embraced the nothingness that is a part of everything. You are free and deny others' attempts to bind you. Constantly emit the aura of nothingness within your domain. Your allies will gain some of the freedom you possess. You are a bringer of nothingness. Your power causes all that would oppose it to fray and slip. Devoured soul body, passive, unique. You have devoured your own soul, uniting it to your body through the primal action. Your body and soul are one, changes to one are reflected in the other. Changes you make in your body are now permanent. Mark of the devourer. Mark of the end, having devoured the marks of greater beings, you have stolen the keys to their power. Mark those who would become the best of meals. The mark will bring you to them when their power becomes significant. Bring about their end. Mark of the beginning, the chimera of beginnings can grant a boon to those that desire change. Grant them the power to grow. Break all the bonds that would restrict them. Greatly improve their growth at the cost of their species. You grant them a new beginning. The aspect of change, having manifested an aspect, your existence embodies that aspect. The appearance of a new aspect can be felt across reality. As an aspect of the fundamental, even your power is but a tiny piece of what it embodies. The aspect grants you limited use of its power. Forcibly change something. Energy costs are proportional to the rigidity of that which you strive to change. Aspect Lord of Change boon, you grow by bringing an end. You grow as the beginnings you begin growing. The more you change, the more you can change. Your previous achievements and accomplishments allow you to claim an additional aspect. Aspects available. Aspect of hunger. Aspect of freedom. Aspect of dungeons. Warning: accepting an additional aspect will have consequences. Holding two aspects signifies your existence as a calamity. Mash didn't return to his body but remained in the semi-conscious state of gaining information from whatever was granting him power. He had always thought of the Force as the class system, but it was clearly something different. Who was behind it? That was the first question that sprung to his mind. Although the answer came along with it. No one created it. The class system or a variant of it likely existed for most beings. That begged the question of who could change. Was a world owner really capable of that? That would make them powerful. Seeing that an aspect of dungeons was a thing, he bet the world owner had something akin to it for the class system itself. The aspect of classes? What could someone do with that? Did Mash even want to meet that person anymore? He had hoped more power would lead to answers, but all he got were more questions. Those would come later. He had the decision to make. An easy one, even after the apparent warning. He was fairly certain being the chimera of the end and the beginning, was calamitous already. And he couldn't resist something like that. The fact that his name changed was strange, but that didn't compare to all the other ridiculous changes, so he paid it little mind. His level had been reset. His attributes were wildly different, and the range of his domain was going to be a lot to adjust to. He didn't even want to consider the implications of creating actual life. That was going to get him in some serious trouble if he did that. Also, could he die? Begin anew certainly made it sound like he couldn't. The change to his magic was something he couldn't wait to try though. And now he was being offered even more power, albeit with some inherent risk. He would tell anyone that asked that he long debated the matter. In reality, he took the aspect of freedom eagerly. If he was going to climb the mountain of power, he would choose the tallest one he could find. Plus, he cared about freedom. Even after he read what had happened, he was still confident in his decision. Well, he was mostly confident in them. Literally, everyone was going to yell at him. The thought made him smile. He focused on the last two things that were added to his status. It was time to go back. The aspect of freedom, your refusal to be bound by any bonds or limits has let you claim the aspect of freedom. Manifest the aspect to free yourself or others from restrictions or corruption. Brand of change and freedom, possessing two aspects marks you as an enemy of those who would resist them. All those who wish to remain unchanged will become your enemies. All those who wish to bind others will become your enemies. Your marks do not allow you any influence over the marked. When you create life, you have no dominion over them. You can never gain or use skills or items that would be used to bind or restrain others. You can only grant people their end or a new beginning free of any limitations. Chapter 326, Elites and Teeth. General Urkish's morning wasn't going well. On top of having to manage the majority of the war, their kingdom's recent growth had led to some serious imbalance. The kingdom had 10 individuals over level 200 now. It was a problem since 2 of them were beastmen. One of whom had inherited a king class. Unsurprisingly, they gained the throne of beasts. Having dominion over monsters was an annoying ability. There were 4 kinds of powers that could be inherited at 200. Thrones were what kings or lords occupied. Divinity was naturally for the gods. Then came aspects, but those only belonged to monsters. Few people knew that monsters leveled and advanced. In their case, it was more of an evolution. Finally, there were people like her. Classers who didn't want to abandon their class and levels gained a secondary class. Those were the most annoying to deal with. Unlike the monsters and gods, who she was fairly certain earned some method to return from death, classers and kings didn't get that ability. Kings were tied to their kingdoms. They could only really die once their kingdom collapsed. As for classes, they lost their weaknesses to an extent. The second class she had gained was the reason she had outlived even the kings. Even gods and monsters couldn't do much damage to her. She was known as a guardian for a reason. Even still she was bothered by the beastmen. She had sent 3 level 200 individuals after them, but the beastmen were still resisting. The king shouldn't have the power to stop them, even with an army of monsters at their back. No, she was certain it was their other elite that was the problem. Like her, the beastmen's champion was proving troublesome. That was also the problem with classers. Unlike the other avenues for power, secondary classes didn't announce themselves to the world when they were achieved. The rest of the war honestly, wasn't that bad. The North had a plethora of worthless leaders and few actually capable combatants. The South had just been opportunistic and hadn't mustered their full might. Plus, armies of undead could be handled by a handful of people over level 100. Internal problems were the cause of her stress. Arthur had broken at the news of Mash's presumed death. Normally, that wouldn't be a concern. But his mood affected the city. He was a hero and pledged to one of the princesses. Not to mention his sister had been even worse. She had very vocally criticized her own goddess for not doing to help. It had already been a month, yet they weren't doing any better. The worst part of that was that she had dumped most of her paperwork to Arthur, and now she couldn't even do that. She had been sitting in her office going for over 3 hours and even more, reports lined her desk. She had been working on them when she felt something change. Her head rang with a warning, and the entire world seemed to react. She cursed, and the king warped into her room. What monster was it? The harpy to the east? But when did pass level 150? She asked the question as soon as the king arrived. It didn't even surprise her, and she was sure the others at their level would be asking soon enough. No, and this isn't just one aspect. I feel 2 within the same being, which shouldn't be possible. There aren't any monsters that were close enough, which means it came through a dungeon. The aspects are strange too. One is warping the world, and the other is breaking my control over the land. The king sounded worried, and Urkish wasn't slow on the uptake. If something could take away his control, then it could kill him. His power was his kingdom, and the more he lost, the more susceptible he became. Isn't it in your domain? I told you it's blocking my control. Its reach is a little over 15,000 feet, so I can't get anything more than you. The king sounded annoyed more than worried. She nodded. They had weathered worse than an unknown high-level monster. The issue was they had too much to deal with already. A monster of the scale the king imagined would take more attention than they could give. I think we need to try and pacify or redirect it. Allow me to access the vaults, we should have something to tempt it away. The king understood and trusted her implicitly. Agreed, but go yourself and take the hunter with you. Lisa POV. Lisa fought against what was a swarm of something. It was a monster, but she didn't know what to call it. It was somehow a horrific combination of a spider, a turtle, and a bird. A shell had openings for 8 legs, although it had a beaked head and pincers simultaneously. Furthermore, its shell could open into a pair of wings, granting it a limited amount of flight. In the scope of everything she had seen during the war, she put it as the 3rd worst monster she had seen. She dodged out of the way as it bit at her legs and ducked another as it flew overhead. Jill appeared beside the one in front and skewered it with her javelin. Lisa held a hand upward and shot a simple spike of mana through the monster. It didn't do much physical damage but cut through its mana and softened them up for her to kill them with a swift strike of her sword. She had picked up a simple scimitar, its only enchantments were for sharpness and durability. As another monster dashed at her, she prepared to deal with it, when she felt something within her change. Mash's mark, which covered her right arm, changed. The teeth marks tattooed onto her skin morphed, and it hurt. Hurt enough that she dropped her weapon and clutched at the hand. She bit her lip rather than scream but couldn't react to the charging monster. Jill appeared and killed the monster easily, before turning to her. What's wrong? What is? Jill trailed off as she realized that it was the mark. Something had happened to Mash, but they had no idea what. Jill moved rather than talk, as Lisa just struggled not to scream. Her whole arm felt like it was burning. Even her bones felt hot. Jill grabbed her and they both vanished, reappearing near Luke in a different part of the battlefield. She's hurt, something to do with the mark. Jill spoke fast then vanished again, presumably returning to where they had been. Is it Mash? What do you feel? Luke peppered Lisa with questions as he began healing her. The pain diminished enough that she could talk, but it wasn't easy. I don't. No. Don't force yourself to talk, we can talk later. His gaze stayed on her arm, and she stared at it too. The bite marks that had been the tattoo were changing. Each bite mark turned instead into a flower. It maintained the color, but the shapes changed. Before long, her whole arm was covered in flowers of different sizes, shapes, and colors. There were roses, sunflowers, and many more. All the pain had changed to awe as she stared at the beautiful tattoo. She had been wearing long sleeves to hide the previous tattoo but was now thinking of clothes to complement it. Now, that is something I could live with. But what is it? Red spoke as she walked into the tent where Luke was. Lisa shook her head indicating that she didn't know. She would find out and moved her focus inward. Name, Lisa. Class, Bonded Mana Dancer. Level, 138-146. Health, 1911/2050. Stamina, 1934/2040. Mana, 4220/5490. Fortitude, 198-205. Endurance, 201-204. Strength, 101-140. Agility, 302-310. Intelligence, 511-549. Wisdom, 200. Charisma, 312-350. Free stats, 080. Skills, Sheri's Mana, Mana Armor, Haste, Master's Message, Leads Supporter, Mana Signature, Temporary Mana Battery, Dancer's Pole, Partner of Mana, Mask of the Slave, Bound Dancer's Chain, the Devourer's First marked the Chimera of the Beginnings first marked. The Devourer's First marked the Chimera of the Beginnings first marked, unique the first to be marked by the Chimera. The boon of the Chimera, your skills advance more quickly. The monster's interest is not without benefits. Gain levels more rapidly. Race changes become more common. The Chimera has no control over you as it has offered you a new beginning, but your growth will help the Chimera grow. Lisa smiled, relieved to see the change. It meant that Mash was still alive and had succeeded. The new mark seemed even better than the old one. It was a little frightening to know that the old mark had given Mash some control over her. This one explicitly stated that it didn't, and it meant that she could finally give something back to him. She had gained levels fast despite not killing that many things. The problem with a war against another army was healers. People rarely died, and they didn't have the time or desire to confirm their kills in a big battle. Luke, Red, and Jill all struggled with that. Jill had killed a lot of people on their first fight, but her explosion had done way too much damage to the battlefield to be used again. Lisa knew Jill was troubled by it. That had been the reason they moved from the southern front to deal with the horde of monsters that the Beastman King was controlling. Jill could be a little freer with her magic. Red's magic was arguably just as indiscriminate, but her control over it was better. Even still, she didn't get many kills. Monsters or people would flee and get healed, and there wasn't much she could do about it. Also, they weren't supposed to intentionally kill people beneath level 100. It was something every side had agreed to. Well, what is it? Jill asked as she teleported into the tent. Lisa excitedly explained the changes. The group all felt the same relief she had. Mash was alive. Mash POV. Mash was about to return to his world when he remembered the weapon. The staff had withstood everything. Even after digging out of his shell, he had found the weapon undamaged. Which was especially impressive when he got to see his cocoon. It was bigger than the mountain and had grown on it like the top of a tree. He looked at the staff, and now that his domain worked, he could tell that it was a magical item now. What happened to it? He tried to analyze the item and could actually see a lot of the details. His domain was strictly better, even beyond the growth in its size. He knew the growth was a good thing too, but it gave him a bad headache. His senses were beyond what his mind could easily handle. He guessed that this was pushing the limits of his mental stats. He would make sure to increase those stats next. It would be fine once he adapted to it, but there wasn't anything he could do to speed that up now. He focused on Priscilla's response as she scanned the item with his new senses. I believe it will become tougher and be able to repair itself. It would be best to check with a professional once you go back. Also, you told me to remind you to check your blood bond. It has been a while, and this recent change is likely to affect it as well. Mash wondered if he should bond to the item. It had held up well in this trial and deserved it. What was the worst case scenario? It would always function as a staff. He channeled a tiny amount of mana into the item and felt it respond. Then the weapon vanished, and he felt a slight sting on his fingers. The word teeth had been tattooed across his fingers. He stared at the black letters as they spread across his finger. That was a weird one for sure. I believe that tattoo is the most appropriate considering the nature of your abilities. The flowers do not fit your nature. Priscilla's snarky message surprised him. She rarely made jokes, but then again, she might be serious. It was the truth that this fit his image better than the flowers. Now that was done, he did what she had suggested, and grabbed the book that would have the skill in it. The book was a little different, and he noticed there were a lot more stories and information on his skill. Path of the Blood Bond. Armor. A bonded armor is a set meant to represent and protect your life. It signifies the strength of your life. It will forever match you. Shaping. The armor automatically shapes itself to fit your body, regardless of changes. Connection. The armor's state reflects your own, its design molded by your thoughts. Physical defense. The armor's physical defense is proportional to 1.5 times your vitality. Magical defense. The armor's magical defense is proportional to 1.5 times your mind. Temperature adjustment. The armor will automatically adjust to your environment. Cloak of identity. Resist or block tracking or scrying attempts. Armor for the army. Produce lesser versions of the armor for others. Connection through cloth. Your cloth can reattach separated limbs. Mash stared at the new abilities and just hoped that the armor for the army came after his recent evolution. If it was before, then he really should have given his friends a set. Taking it in a positive light, it looked like he would have gifts. Chapter 327, Reunion. Mash walked through a portal, returning to his world to even more confusion. His domain was massive, and the sudden shift of setting flooded his mind with information. He staggered as he got accustomed to his surroundings. He barely managed it, only to be flooded by more information as the many bodies of Priscilla sent a month's worth of information into his head. A little under a week in the dungeon had been just under a month here, and a lot had changed. He could see a lot with his domain, and he didn't sense a single adventurer within it. The information Priscilla gave him told him why. The war started soon after he entered, and it was keeping the adventurers busy. His friends were all fine, he could tell that much. Priscilla mentioned that something had happened to Lisa's mark, which made sense considering how his own skill had changed. His siblings had been devastated by his supposed death. Mash was more than a little shocked to hear that they had assumed he had died. Although, it was a fair concern. He was one of those who should be able to leave a dungeon so long as he was alive. The only good reason for his sudden disappearance being death, made a lot of sense. Mash, you're okay. What happened? Why did you just disappear like that? Luna and Arthur berated him with questions, soon followed by a series of messages from his friends as well. Mash couldn't answer them individually and told Priscilla to update them on what happened. Although, he told her to leave out the brand. A discussion like that should be handled in person. Mash turned toward the directions of his friends. He was certain Jill would teleport to him in a moment, but he wanted to test his own capabilities a little. Wings grew from Mash's back. Not wooden, but a pair of real draconic wings sprouted from his back. Then he added more, another layer of wyvern wings grew just beneath him. The energy cost was small, insignificant compared to before. In the past, the mana cost would be immense and sustaining the form even more so. Now, the transformation took little of his energy, and he used none to maintain it. He shot from the ground with so much speed that he practically struck a solid wall of air. The more he sped up, the closer that wall felt. The skies seemed to want to trap him. To deny his flight, but he pushed through it. With a little bit of wind magic, he broke through that wall and felt the freedom of the skies. It was his to roam now. He considered going higher, to break into the skies where he had seen the dragon before. No, it wasn't the time yet. The wind blew past him in a blur. Jill teleported beside him only to get blown back by the wind. She spiraled through the air and fell. Mash watched in his domain as she righted herself and teleported again. This time Mash did stop for her as she chose to teleport in front of him. His sudden stop didn't stop the wind and it crashed into Jill, sending her tumbling through the air. Her next teleport sent her directly beside him, and she threw a punch at him. Mash easily dodged out of the way. I swear to God, Mash. Whatever happened to you, I think I can still teleport you to the bottom of the ocean. Jill smiled widely, though tears ran down her cheeks. You can't teleport me there unless you went there while I was gone. She didn't respond as she struggled to form words through a half-sob. Instead, she grabbed one of his hands and the world around them warped. An instant later he found himself in the middle of a tent. Then his domain caught up to him, and the battlefield had far too much going on. It felt like the information was literally banging on the inside of his skull. He lost his footing and nearly fell. Luke caught him and healed him without any questions. Mash? Are you okay? Mash nodded. Yeah, my domain is a lot bigger. It takes a little bit for me to adjust when I teleport. Luke didn't step away from him after healing him. Instead, he pulled Mash into a hug. Lisa joined, pressing into him from behind. Jill grabbed Red and joined as well. With how big Luke was, neither Red nor Jill could actually touch Mash. Even still, he felt reassured by each of them. They lingered like that for a moment. Red was the first to separate, followed by Jill and Luke. Finally, Lisa let go, whispering something before parting. Thank you. She backed off before he could say anything else, and he felt like asking her in front of everyone wasn't appropriate. He didn't understand why she would thank him. And it wasn't a simple thing either. He could feel her emotions a little and knew how genuine she was being. What had he done? As he thought about it, his eyes drifted toward the flowers on her arm. Hey, that looks a lot better on you than me. The flowers' bright colors only highlighted Lisa's strangely blue hair. He stared at her for a moment. When he noticed her staring back, he turned abruptly. His face burned with embarrassment. You're different somehow. Lisa spoke as she continued to stare at him. He could both see and feel her eyes on the back of his head. He tried his best to explain what he thought she was mentioning. Yeah, a whole lot. I'm a great monster of calamity now. And my name is no longer Mash. Also, I gained this thing called an aspect. Actually, I have 2 of them. Stop. Mash, you aren't making any sense. What exactly is your class? Priscilla didn't tell us everything, just that you were okay and advanced. Red cut off his poor explanation, realizing it wouldn't lead anywhere. Mash calmed down and answered her question. It's not really a class. I got rid of the class system for something else. So, it's the name of my, species. I'm now the chimera of the end and the beginning. Jill pantomimed, cleaning her out. Care to run that by us one more time? The chimera of the end and the beginning. He replied automatically. Yeah, that's what I thought I heard. So, are you going to need our help destroying the world, or do we just watch? Honestly, I'm down for either. Mash gave Jill a flat look. I'll help. It sounds like fun. Lisa added in, but she was better at sounding genuine. She seemed genuinely eager to help him. He decided to play into it. I don't know, maybe after a couple of days. I just got back and need to test a few things first. You know, like forcibly changing reality by manifesting the aspect of change. Explain. Red stopped the joke with a single word. She seemed to realize that his words were more than a joke. Yet, I don't really understand everything about them, but I got my aspects when my system changed. I had the option to become a king or a god, and they said I would receive something similar. The king was a throne of some type of power, and God would grant me a piece of divinity, whatever that is. Mash stopped talking when he saw the empty stares and open mouths. They seemed frozen, and he waved his hands to get their attention. Jill was the first to speak, her voice laced with incredulity. You can't be serious. You chose not to be a god to become some monster. Wait, that's your concern. How did you qualify to become a god? Luke's words cut as he said them with some notable hostility. He seemed to reject the very idea of it. Mash just shrugged his shoulders. I think it's just a kind of power, not really about moral character or right. Those were not the right words, and they devastated Luke. He took a few steps backward as if Mash had slapped him. Red stepped closer and asked Mash a more pointed question. What did you do that you're not telling us? He took a half step away, wondering where she pulled that from. She was right, but he wondered what he had said to give it away. I believe it was when you mentioned possessing your aspect, you referred to it in the plural. Priscilla was just as sharp as Red and had noticed his slip. He sighed. Fine, I got one more thing. Well, Too technically. I have the aspect of change and was offered the aspect of freedom as well. I took it, but it had some consequences. Mash hesitated a little. He knew that they would get angry if he told them what those consequences were. He wasn't really all that worried since they usually took things well enough. He was surprised when Red spoke first. We won't get too angry. When we thought you died, we talked about a few things. One of those was about our decision to stick together. At least tell us what to expect. She sounded regretful and abashed. Even with what they said, he wasn't sure how the reality would come across. It's probably going to cause some problems. I got this thing called the brand of change and freedom. It does some crazy stuff, including marking me as an enemy of those who would maintain. Also, I'm an enemy to all those who would bind people. I don't think the method exactly matters. So, slavers, gods, kings, and maybe even parents will see me as some great villain. I don't exactly know the details, but I imagine plenty of people are well aware of my existence. Red looked like she wanted to get angry but visibly restrained any biting words. Is it strange that I'm a little jealous? The words didn't come from Jill as he expected but from Lisa. She looked at him so wistfully that he couldn't take it as a joke. We were already hiding my class from the gods, what's one more? Pretty sure my next advancement will create more enemies. Jill spoke, clapping Mash on the shoulder in congratulations. They were doing a good job of not being angry. But the support was creepy. Luke and Red remained quiet for a few moments. Then Luke came over and rested a hand on his shoulder. It could be worse. You could be a necromancer or slaver. This sounds like you're the literal opposite. That was true enough, even though he would likely never be offered those options. Red seemed to swallow her previous words before speaking. You know, I genuinely expected worse. I still have dozens of questions for you, and you are going to answer them. Questions were something he could handle. He wanted to hear some of their thoughts regarding his abilities too. Chapter 328, No. Red still couldn't believe everything. That doesn't make any sense. My own father is over level 150, and he isn't like you. Mash shrugged his shoulders in a noncommittal manner and didn't bother responding to her. Instead, he moved over the tent flap and opened it right as General Urkish approached. Maybe you can explain. He had been tracking her approach since she entered his domain. He was also aware of when she had begun eavesdropping on them. She knew what they were talking about and would certainly have more answers than him. Without any change in her firm expression, she responded. It's because what Mash did normally doesn't happen till level 200. And I would love to hear how you managed that. And why did you advance like the monsters? The general did not look pleased, but her words perked Mash's ears. Wait, you know that monsters have levels and advancements. Did you know that animals did too? Answer my questions first. She made sure to stress every word, and she somehow pressed her power upon him. The highest leveled person in the kingdom was intimating. He let out a relaxed breath as her attempt to press him washed off like rain. Sorry, but I don't have an answer for either of those. I think it was a mark from one of the many world owners that I have met. I mean my own. He was made to stop speaking, as Red covered his mouth. She smiled at the general sweetly before speaking. I think that's enough of an answer. It's your turn. The annoyed face the general made when Red decided to speak was telling. Mash decided it would be better to leave her to it. You know, this is why your family has such a shitty reputation. But fine, yeah, I know that almost any living being has access to something. Most animals never manage to get far, but you get some stories occasionally. A cat causing some bad luck or a turtle that has been said to live for countless years. Not to mention the things in the sea's depths. Plenty of the monsters we see outside of dungeons, are animals that wandered into a dungeon and managed to kill or pass it. Despite what Urkish suggested with her words, Mash struggled to imagine a cat clearing a dungeon. She answered his question though, so he guessed that meant it was his turn. Well, got any more questions for me? The general nodded. Yeah, but we don't need to bother with this back and forth. Just ask what you want, and I will just tell you if I can't answer. I'm not a noble and don't care to turn a conversation into a competition. Mash preferred this as well. Straightforward and simple. What's 2 plus 2? Jill's joke was not amusing, and everyone ignored her as Lisa pulled her away. Red's voice was biting with her glare pointed at Jill. What makes level 200 so special? The normal class system only goes so far. Normally, people don't hit that limit for a long time. I call it level 200, but it's really a power threshold. Most people have to find new sources of power after hitting that level before getting out of it. Honestly, I was stuck at level 200 for something like a decade or two. The general spoke about 2 decades in the blink of an eye. He found himself nodding in understanding. He knew that his power far exceeded his level. Thus, getting the change early made a lot of sense. Wait, so the same thing won't happen to us? Luke piped up from whatever deep contemplation he had been struggling with. No, I expect you will have to wait unless one of you has gained considerable power outside of your class. Although, from what I was led to believe, Mash was the only one to have done that, I have already been caught unaware once, so I would appreciate a warning if one of you were going to accomplish the same. Everyone other than Mash shook their heads furiously. The general nodded, and Mash asked his own question. He had realized something once the general entered his domain. What does it mean to have an aspect? And why don't I feel like you have one? Because I don't. At level 200 you can abandon the class system and get something like that, or you can get a second class. If you choose the class, the second class will balance you and cover any would-be weaknesses. As for the aspects, thrones, or shards of divinity, they grant a form of protection, let's call it. Mash can explain that part better than me. Heads turned to him, and he cleared his throat. Yeah, I didn't get there yet. I'm fairly certain I can't die. So long as my aspects exist in reality, I won't die. I'll just keep reviving, but I imagine it would take a long time. He stopped there, turning to see if the general had anything to add. She eyed him curiously before asking. What aspect do you have? How fundamental is it? It's change, so very. Her gaze narrowed. Change and freedom are quite immutable. So yes, you won't die, even if you wanted to at this point. Although with things that fundamental, I imagine it would be a century or two for full revival. It's shorter with the more specific and fragile aspects. Mash had an idea of how she knew what his aspects were. Red didn't though, and drew attention to herself merely by shifting her stance. It was a subtle unobtrusive motion, but it drew everyone's eye. Care to explain how you knew his aspects? You're not supposed to have 2 aspects. And when I say you, I mean literally anyone. Whatever form of power it is, a person's body can normally only handle 1. Now that brings me to my questions. Why do you have 2, and why does that make you, Mash, my enemy? Her gaze turned to Mash. It changed from the domineering but the neutral gaze of a commander. Now it was filled with open hostility and bloodthirst. He met the gaze evenly. It wasn't the knowledge of his undying nature that made him confident. He had finally made it. His power was no longer something that could be ignored or threatened easily. I got offered 2 and took them. The consequence of that is letting everyone know what I have, and it marks me for those who don't like those things. It's pretty unspecific though, so I'm pretty sure most parents would likely see me as an enemy if they could. Luke stepped in between the two of them to interject. Why don't we sense these things? The general rolled her eyes. You're too weak. Get to level 200 then you can sense them too. Mash actually felt a wave of relief at that. That's one weight off my shoulders. I was worried that every other person I met would think I was their enemy or something. They talked a little more. The general asked plenty of questions, but so did Red. Before long they had tired most points of conversation. It came to an end when Mash finally asked an important question. How do aspects actually work? Is it like other magic? That question provoked Urkish to an angry response. After everything we talked about, you actually think I will tell you anything about them? Don't use them. Her expression hardened. It was the gaze of someone needing to discipline their children. The words irked him. No. Mash shouted the word, and he could feel his domain react. His very presence seemed to fill the domain. He could see his friends step away from him. Only, Lisa seemed to be withstood the sudden change. The general also remained unflinching, and she stepped closer. You don't understand those powers. They are destabilizing the kingdom. He considered what she said but didn't care. He was tired of restrictions, of people or things trying to manipulate or control him. He was tired of discovering new forces that far outclassed him. This was not the end of his journey, but he finally had enough power to say no. I don't care. I mean I care, but not in the way you do. My powers are good. They will change this world and I want them to. So, I will use them. Is that the grand plan you've come to? Destroy the world and force it to be what you want? The general was getting angry too. Mash snapped back. No. My power is to change the world and give it the freedom to grow without bonds. People like you or me shouldn't be able to control the whole world. You think I haven't heard that before? Your answer half-baked. It will do nothing but create anarchy. You can't just break things because you don't like them. Mash cursed and stepped back from her. He didn't have the words to dispute her, so he turned to things he couldn't accept. You're right, but even still there are things I want to change. There are two things I can start with now. Slavery and the class system. The general clearly wasn't ready for him to agree. Her eyes went wide when he mentioned the things. Then she smiled. Well, I'll be more than happy to drop you like the calamity you are in the north. Although, be careful about messing with the class system. You're not the only that has the power to affect it. There are changes you can make, but don't expect much. As for the rest, we can discuss that later. If you want to practice your abilities, do it outside of my home. Those last words were accompanied by the warping of space. The entire tent seemed to distort and vanish like Jill's skill. Mash felt like he could have blocked it, but he didn't. He could tell where she was sending them. Chapter 329, Tactical Mash. The general hadn't teleported them directly into the fight. She had deposited them near the commander who was leading the battle here. The commander had been more than happy to receive a group like theirs and had assigned them to tasks. Mash had used his levels to push himself into a position he felt suited him more. Not to mention a job that should let him showcase his abilities and test his new aspects. This he had been given a map with a few locations and armies highlighted. Those which contained a large number of slaves. Urkish and the commander both seemed to believe that his aspects would do something to the slaves. He had to agree and was more than a little eager to test it. He didn't leave immediately and watched his friends with his domain for a second. He had just reunited with them and was now alone again. They were heading to a different battlefield, one without any obvious slavers. In reality, the real reason they were going in opposite directions was Jill. Next to people like Mash, people that had teleport abilities were the next best thing. Thus, it was somewhat of a waste to send Mash and Jill to the same location. They would essentially be a standby force to respond to any emergencies. His destination was different, and it was time to go. Mash had been sitting on the roof of the fort that they had been teleported to. The entire fort had been made with magic and was actually an enormous metal rectangle. The surface was black and smooth, and the snow crashing around it didn't stick to the surface. Now, it was time to leave. He stood as wings sprouted from his back. Two sets like before. They were not made of magic but had grown from his body. They were made of flesh and muscle. Real limbs with all of their power. Black scales that were dark as night coated them. It was strange but the scales seemed to shimmer with rainbow light as they moved in the sunlight. This time he made them larger than before. They grew and grew until he was dwarfed by their size. Shadows cascaded down the side of the tower. When he took off the wall of air that had restrained him before shattered as he used magic to cut through the wind. The snow passed like white streaks as he flew into the north. Giant battles took place beneath him, but he ignored them. These weren't the battles for him, though several people had noticed him. A few even managed to throw attacks his way, not they had the chance to actually hit him. They were simply too slow to hit him. Mash's mere presence disturbed some of the battlefields. He might have made his wings a little too big. The wiser members of the armies knew better than to act. At their level, he was more or less a natural disaster. There was only so much they could do if he chose to fight them. He wasn't going to active battlefields though. His destination was behind them. The armies and cities were filled with slaves. He was meant to cause chaos by freeing the people. A job he was more than happy to accept. Mash knew his destination before he arrived. His domain let him examine the armies thoroughly. Even without it, his powers let him feel the slave collars. It was like a scent that he had picked up on. It burned his nostrils as if it were something hideous. He stopped just above the army, his very presence a challenge to the entire north. When he stopped, the air around him cracked as if he had struck it. He looked down upon the army that had barely noticed his arrival. That changed in almost an instant as his domain crashed over them like a storm. Separate from the snow that was already falling on them. He dropped out of the sky and fell toward the army. He halted when he noticed some of their own flew out to meet him. They were shouting something, but he ignored it. He was close enough now. His own voice wasn't diminished by the snow as it was transmitted into the minds of everyone within his domain. You are free. Mash said the words with complete confidence. The knowledge of his aspect and what it would do when he used it appeared in his mind. It was almost as if the aspect wanted to free them, and it was telling him how. He looked over the army and the many faces who were turning towards him with fear and disbelief. Slaves and soldiers alike couldn't process his words, but they felt them. They felt the power and intention behind them. The very world seemed to feel it, as he tugged on the aspect. The aspect wasn't a physical thing. It was some grand power that existed beyond his world, beyond any world. And Mash didn't hold the whole thing. It was too big and shared among too many. For him, there was a more direct connection to the aspect, and he knew that it was his aspect. He knew what it was and how to use it. His magic was like a rope that tied him to the aspect, and he pulled on that connection. The energy drained from him rapidly. It was more than anything he had tried before. Then the aspect could be felt by more than just him. The whole world seemed to react. The space around him seemed to change slightly. The snow moved more swiftly, and the voices of the soldiers carried despite the storm. Then it went a step further, and the air seemed to tremble. It wasn't just the air. The ground shook for a moment, and some people stumbled as if the world had turned on its side. The people who had flown out to meet him froze and fell from the sky, screaming in pain. Mash could see them. Blood was running from their eyes like tears, and one of them was clutching at their chest desperately. He didn't know what that was, but he couldn't stop now. The aspect was making its presence known, and everyone could feel it. He was not left alone either. Perhaps it even affected him most strongly. He felt the powers rip into him. It tried to forcibly rip him apart. Remove Priscilla from him even if it killed her. He could hear her wails of agony as the power tore her body to apart. Priscilla was fundamentally a part of his soul now, and power was trying to tear their souls apart to free her. Mash focused on the power and on Priscilla. He was the chimera of the end, and he would stop it. His own domain seemed to narrow and constrict. Tighten around the touch of the aspect, and he tried to bring an end to it. He managed to stop it and sent a message to Priscilla immediately. Are you okay? It took a few long seconds before she replied. Yes, the damage was not permanent. We will need to be more careful with this aspect. Although it seems you can block it to some extent. Mash nodded and continued to focus on blocking the aspect from reaching her. It was hard. It felt like a mountain was trying to sit on him, and he nearly fell from the sky from the pressure. He couldn't stop the skill either. He had pulled on the aspect and there was no stopping its arrival. Then the drain on his energy stopped, and he heard the world snap. It was a singular sound that resonated across the sky like the roar of thunder. His domain let him see what had made the sound. The gems, collars, chains, and whatever else was used to bind the slaves broke. They snapped and shattered, falling from the soldiers in an instant. The slavers were all on the ground. Some were gasping in pain, while others just lay there unmoving. Mash didn't focus on them and spoke again. You are free. Live the way you want. His eyes roamed over the army. Faces turned to him. Others held the shattered remains of their collars as if they were precious jewels. Some even looked at him with hostility. A few turned and attacked the slavers who were still able to move. He ignored the priests and priestesses that had collapsed to their knees. Their hands pressed together as they prayed to a connection he knew had been severed. It was likely only temporary as they could meet with their gods and re-establish it, but he knew that fact would be known soon. The freedom he granted didn't discriminate. Whether it was a slaver or a god, his power would cut those powers. Nobody was truly free, but his abilities granted that for a moment to everyone. Even he had felt the effects of the aspect. It had tried to rip Priscilla from his soul. He managed to block it, but he knew it had done more damage to her than him. It would have killed her. The thought frightened him a little. He would need to test the power more. His domain let him block it, but it wasn't easy. Summoning the aspect had done something to the world too, and he didn't have enough knowledge. Despite all that, he didn't shy away from the power. There was a connection between him and the aspect. As much as the power was devastating to some, he could see the good it had done. Many of the freed slaves were celebrating, hugging and searching for their friends. Others had left already. He couldn't be sure where they were headed, but he imagined the family that they would be able to meet again. He was tempted to follow some of the groups and summon the aspects in those cities. He would do it, but not yet. Either way, this was the power he wanted. He would use it. There were more armies to break. I believe your connection with the others had been broken too. Jill will not be able to teleport to you. Mash nodded but wasn't all that concerned. His eyes drifted over the battlefield. The high-leveled slavers were dead. The generals were unconscious or clutching at wounds that he couldn't see. Some of those people were over level 100. He looked at them and felt the fear of nearly everyone. Even those who were celebrating their newfound freedom were hesitant. They traded glances among themselves, some even got to their knees in supplication. When they did that, he felt his stomach churn. Bile scratched at his throat, and he shivered. He was tempted to yell at them but decided to just leave. His words would not ease their fears. He turned toward the next army. The aspect let him feel it, let him know where the slaves were. Chapter 330, The Lightning Tree. Mash had dealt with 3 armies so far. None had caused him any trouble. His own skill was the hardest thing to manage, and he needed to take a break after the second army. The energy cost was just too much to handle. He had needed to recover, even if the armies didn't touch him. Each army just collapsed and broke apart as soon as he used the aspect. He was leaving a trail of dead bodies. Although for each person he left dead, there were a dozen others who had been saved. Freed from the bonds of slavery. However, he had left them like that. He didn't offer them a new path and realized with some discomfort that he couldn't. His brand had a strange effect on what he could and couldn't do. One of the things he couldn't do, was offer any direction to the slaves he freed. Logically, he knew that they would listen. Whether out of fear or misguided worship, they would treat his words like commands. And he knew it. The brand knew it, and it stopped him. When he had tried, his mind just couldn't formulate the right words. Even Priscilla was restricted by it. So, he had left every army to deal with its own consequences. The slavers he killed directly would only be a fraction of the total bodies left behind him. He didn't even know if the slaves would be able to maintain their freedom, though he didn't feel any signs of slavery behind him. That was some reassurance since he could still feel them before him. He was heading to the densest group that he could sense. The map hadn't actually marked it, so he guessed it was a city rather than an army. It wasn't part of his assigned duties, but he wasn't going to turn away. It was too close for him to ignore. It was an affront to his very purpose, and he wanted nothing more than to remove it. More than just that, it would be immoral to ignore it. Like abandoning a small child to drown when he could easily save them. The snowstorm had passed, and he flew through unblemished skies. The sun was out but only barely. The mountains that surrounded the northern territories brought an early end to the day. Sunlight streamed between the mountains. It highlighted his path, and certainly made his presence more noticeable than it already was. His domain let him spot more than a few people. Hunters or scouts who stalked him through the snow and trees beneath. Their attempts at stealth were laughable to him, even though they would have worked on nearly anyone else. He ignored them since they couldn't keep up, and the city was closed now. As Mash crossed the next mountain, he saw the city. He didn't really see it with his eyes, but with the sense imparted to him by the aspect. It was essentially a color that seemed to stain space around the city. As if someone used the wrong color of paint on the skies themselves. He flew slightly higher to get a better look at the mountain where the city was. It wasn't a particularly unique mountain. Some trees grew along its slopes, though it was covered in the same stone as every other. The only strange aspect was that the peak of the mountain seemed as if it were cut off. Although, the last city he had been to in the north was similar. The people had replaced the peak with a vent to expel heat. That assumption was proven wrong as the mountain entered his domain. The city wasn't built within a mountain. It was built on a volcano. Well, within the opening at the top, though he didn't know what that was called. A large amount of cooled and thick stone separated the city from the magma within. It was likely still hot, and he understood how the city managed to ignore the otherwise freezing temperatures. Even if that was convenient and safe, he couldn't imagine who would want to live on a volcano. That seemed a little reckless, but who was he to judge people on recklessness? He flew over top the city, only halting when he felt his domain clash with another. This domain was a semi-spherical space around the city. As soon as Mash touched it, he knew what it was, and who ruled it. Not the exact person, but the throne of power that occupied the space. It wasn't a literal fact, but a feeling of what the nature of the power was. He felt a chill across his neck. Instinctively, his hand rose to tear the collar from his neck. There was nothing there, yet the feeling of cold metal remained. It was not pleasant, but he understood. This was the throne of shackles or collars. Just as he knew that the holder of that throne would know what Mash was. Mash spoke, his voice echoed across the minds of the city's denizens. It wasn't even hard with his new attributes. I am here to free you. Then he reached for the aspect again. He had practiced with live tests against the past army and could stop the power from affecting Priscilla now. Not fully, but enough that it didn't do any real damage. His domain tightened around Priscilla, but he stopped when he heard another person. A voice rose through the skies as a man followed them. He didn't fly. Instead, long chains lifted him from the mountain like a spider's legs. They formed into a glorified seat beneath the man, and Mash realized the truth. It was the throne of chains, and here was the king who held it. The king was a skinny man. Thin and wiry like the chains that held him up. His skin was even tinted grey like metal. A physical change in relation to his class, probably meant that the man was physically tougher than he seemed. The man didn't have hair but had chains coiled around the top of his head to form a tall crown. Unsurprisingly, the man wore thick chainmail armor. It covered his body so completely, that his skin was nearly completely hidden. Other than the little bit of skin that showed around his eyes, Mash couldn't see much else about the man. You think I will just let you do that? His voice was deep and echoing. Whenever his teeth touched it sounded like swords clashing. It stressed his words in odd ways. Mash looked at confidence and wondered where it came from. Mash felt like his power countered the king. Even if it didn't, all Mash needed to do was use the aspect. He didn't need to fight. If he freed the slaves, that alone would be enough to dismantle the kingdom. The king's words ended with a jerking motion as he lunged toward Mash abruptly. The world around them seemed to fizz and vanish, and the king halted when it did. The warping of the world startled Mash. They had been teleported somewhere. His domain adjusted quickly, and the lack of headache was surprising too. Wherever they were, it was pretty empty. The ground beneath his feet was simple. A long grassland with a river running through it. The skies were empty, and he noticed that there were no other people around. In fact, there were no animals or monsters either. It was just him and the king, and Mash couldn't help but ask. Where are we? He thought about it for a second and the answer came to him. This was where the high-level people got teleported to for fights. He had forgotten about that since it hadn't been applied yet. That was why the king had closed the distance. In order to trap Mash in this fight. It kind of worked. Mash could escape with his portals, not that he felt the need. This won't save you. You can feel my aspects. They kind of counter yours. Mash didn't use Priscilla to help his voice carry. There was nothing here besides the two of them. Even though there was a large space between the two of them, they could hear one another clearly. Mash's domain didn't fully fill the space, but it was large enough that the king was well within its limits. The chains around the king's body and within his throne were shifting, moving as the king rose slightly higher. He didn't fly, but his range of movement seemed nearly as complete as Mash. The chains around the king's mouth loosened to reveal a confident smile. You understand so little. You know I sensed your appearance. Do you think I would not have prepared for this? That I would not know what your aspects might do to my throne? You have made several mistakes coming here. First, your aspect does not counter mine, it is the other way around. Second, you can barely touch upon that power, whereas I own mine. Lastly, you only just reached my level. I have been here for over half a century. The king spoke imperiously, his chin turned up as his throne rose to Mash's height. Mash opened his mouth to retort and found it empty. He turned to Priscilla in that instant. Any good comeback? If you are turning to me for verbal wordplay, then I suggest you give up on it entirely. Her response made him close his mouth. Well, that was a fair point. He was better at fighting than talking, and there were more than a few things he was eager to use. Things he hadn't gotten to practice yet. Like the new ways, he could combine his magic. Although, while hadn't done much testing, Priscilla had been exploring it. She outlined a few possible combinations he could use to strike the king. Mash chose one and didn't bother with the reply anymore. His hand flew up, his palm opened toward the king. The man's eyes widened slightly, but even at level 200, one couldn't just dodge lightning. Light filled the space between them, illuminating the skies in brown and green for a moment. The flash subsided and the king let out a grunt of pain. Mash could see what had happened with his domain before his eyes adjusted. The king stared in disbelief as blood ran from a wound along one of his shoulders. A streak of wood spread from his ground and ran through the man's shoulder and chains like they weren't even there. It went past him, breaking and lancing into the ground. Mash stared in awe at his own attack. An upside-down tree extended from his palm and stabbed into the ground beneath in a devastating moment of destruction. Long, thin branches of dense brown wood spread from an equally thin extension. Unlike regular lightning, his attack hadn't resulted in the expected roar of thunder. Instead, it had left the tree in its wake. Mash couldn't stop a toothy smile from spreading across his face. That attack was large, powerful, and everything he had hoped. His attack had bypassed the man's armor, seeming to travel through him like regular lightning. Only after it had completed its path, the wood just formed, piercing through everything along the path. The attack had gone far too. Mash thought he understood why the system changed at this level of power. If he still leveled like normal, he could massacre entire cities for them easily. As it turned out, he wasn't leveling from killing people. Even the slavers that had died hadn't given him a single level. Either it took significantly stronger opponents, or the more likely situation, there was an alternative method. He looked at the king and his smile grew wider. He thought that the king might give him a level or two.